Your property access has been suspended. Consider this your final eviction notice. You don't belong here.
That's what the HOA president said to me at 11 o'clock at night, while I stood on my own driveway, locked out of my own house, holding flowers I'd just brought to my wife's grave. She'd hired a locksmith while I was gone, changed every deadbolt, padlocked the garage, and waited by her window to watch me discover it. She said those words like she was reading a verdict, like she had the authority to remove a man from his own home. She didn't. Under Georgia law, what she did was a criminal lockout. Under federal law, what she'd been doing for 9 years, funneling $347,000 in stolen HOA money through her husband's shell company, was wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. She locked out an FBI forensic accountant. By sunrise, federal agents padlocked her mansion. Where are you watching this from? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Claire died on a Tuesday in April. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. One day she was laughing at me for overcooking pasta, and 7 weeks later, I was standing in a suit I hadn't worn in 3 years, watching them lower her into the ground at Arlington. I spent 25 years at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I traced dirty money through shell corporations in 14 countries. I sat across from men who laundered billions and made them explain every wire transfer until their lawyers begged for plea deals. I thought I was tough. Then Claire got sick, and I found out tough doesn't mean what I thought it meant. After she passed, the house in Falls Church became a museum I couldn't live in. Her reading glasses on the nightstand, her coffee mug in the sink, the garden she planted every spring, Cherokee purple tomatoes, her pride and joy, going to seed in the backyard, because I couldn't bring myself to pull them or water them. Lauren, our daughter, was finishing her residency at Emory in Atlanta. She called every night for 3 months, and on the 4th month, she stopped asking how I was doing and started sending me real estate listings in Gwinnett County. Just look, Dad. Just come down and look. I looked. I bought. A modest ranch-style house in a subdivision called Hawthorne Estates. 1,800 square feet, a big backyard, a 2-car garage where I could finally restore the '71 Chevelle that Claire had been telling me to finish for a decade. I planted Cherokee purples in the front bed the first weekend. Same variety, same stakes. Claire would have approved. Diane Caldwell showed up on my second day. She pulled into my driveway in a pearl-white Cadillac Escalade, stepped out in a linen blazer over yoga pants and sunglasses that cost more than my lawnmower, and walked toward my front door carrying a clipboard like she was serving a warrant. She introduced herself not as the HOA president, but as the president. No first name offered, no welcome basket. She scanned my half-unpacked garage, glanced at the tomato bed, looked at the cardboard boxes stacked on my porch, and said, "We have standards here, Mr. Calloway. I trust you'll meet them." She'd been HOA president for 9 years. That's what I found out later. 9 years of unchallenged authority over 112 homes in a subdivision where the pool was rusting, the playground was broken, the front gate stuck open every 3rd week, and the annual dues had climbed to $2,520, 40% higher than when she'd taken over. But the lawns were inspected, the mailboxes were measured, and God help you if your trash can was 6 inches left of where Diane Caldwell thought it should be. The first violation letter arrived on day 5. My Chevelle, parked inside my own garage with the door open, was cited as visual blight, detrimental to community aesthetics. Fine, $400. The second came on day 9. My Cherokee purple tomatoes were unauthorized agricultural activity in a residential landscape zone. Fine, $800. The third came on day 16. My trash can sat 6 inches from the designated spot. I measured it myself later with a tape measure, and she was right, technically, by exactly 6 inches. Fine, $1,200. $2,400 in 3 weeks. I hadn't even finished unpacking. That's when Pete Harmon walked over with a 6-pack of Sweetwater 420 and a warning. Pete was 62, retired electrician, lived 4 doors down. He sat on my porch, cracked a beer, and said, 3 families before you got the same treatment. All of them moved within a year. She picks a house and she squeezes until they leave. He took a long sip and added, her husband Greg runs some landscaping company, supposed to be maintaining the common areas. I've never seen anyone but old Hector with a push mower. I thanked Pete for the beer. I didn't tell him what I used to do for a living. I replanted the Cherokee purples on a Saturday morning, got up before the heat hit, worked the Georgia red clay with a spade until my shoulders ached, mixed in compost I'd bought from the garden center on Peachtree Industrial, and put 12 seedlings in the ground in 2 neat rows. The soil down here was different from Virginia, heavier, stickier, the color of rust, but the plants didn't care. Within 2 weeks, they were knee-high and reaching for the sun, and every time I watered them in the evening, I could hear Claire's voice in my head telling me I was overwatering again. I drove to Publix on a Wednesday afternoon to pick up groceries. Gone maybe 90 minutes. When I pulled back into my driveway, the front bed looked like someone had run a tiller through it. Every single plant was gone. Not pulled, shredded. The riding mower had come straight through the bed, chopped the stems into green pulp, and left tire tracks in the clay that cut 6 inches deep. Dirt was scattered across the walkway. Crushed tomatoes, still green, weeks from ripening, were smeared into the concrete like someone had stomped on them for fun. The stakes I'd driven in by hand were snapped in half and tossed onto the lawn. I stood there holding a bag of groceries in each hand, staring at the mess, and for a second I couldn't breathe. Not because of the plants, because of what they meant. Claire had grown Cherokee purples every summer for 22 years. She'd start the seeds in little peat pots on our kitchen windowsill in March, transfer them to the garden in May, and by August, she'd have enough to fill a bushel basket and still give bags away to neighbors. That tomato bed was the one thing I'd carried from our old life into this one, and now it was mulch. Carol Jennings, across the street, saw the whole thing from her living room. She came over before I'd put the groceries down. "Diane sent Greg's crew," she said. 2 guys on a riding mower, said it was landscape remediation. They were here maybe 20 minutes. Landscape remediation. That's what she called it. Destroying a dead woman's garden was remediation. I called Diane that evening. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been expecting it. I kept my voice level. 25 years at the Bureau teaches you how to stay flat when someone is trying to provoke you. "You sent a crew onto my property and destroyed my garden," I said. "Your unauthorized vegetation was a liability to the community's visual standard," she said. "I gave you written notice. You chose to replant. I chose to resolve it. You destroyed my property. I improved it." I let the silence sit for 5 full seconds. Then I said, "Don't come onto my property again, Mrs. Caldwell," and I hung up. That night I sat on the back porch with a beer and thought about what Pete had said. 3 families before me, all moved within a year. She picks a house and squeezes. This wasn't a neighbor dispute. This was a system. She'd been doing this for 9 years, and nobody had ever pushed back hard enough to make it stop. I went inside and pulled up the HOA's annual financial statements on my laptop. They were posted on the community website behind a resident login. Bare minimum transparency, just enough to claim compliance. I started reading. Revenue, expenses, reserves, vendor contracts. Most people's eyes glaze over looking at HOA financials. Mine don't. I've spent a quarter century reading documents exactly like these. And the thing about financial fraud is it always whispers before it screams. The dues had gone from $1,800 to $2,520 in 3 years, a 40% increase. But the common areas were falling apart. The pool pump hadn't been replaced in 6 years. The playground had a broken swing set with caution tape on it since last October. And the front gate's keypad worked about half the time. Where was the money going? I didn't have an answer yet, but I had a question. And in my line of work, the right question is worth more than 100 answers. 2 weeks later, Diane came for the Chevelle. That car meant something to me that I couldn't fully explain to anyone who hadn't been married for 27 years. Claire bought it for me at an estate auction in Fredericksburg the year I turned 40. It was a wreck, seized engine, rust holes in the quarter panels, mice living in the headliner. She handed me the title at dinner and said, "Now you have something to do on weekends instead of reading case files." I'd been restoring it on and off for 14 years. New block, new interior, still needed paint and wiring. Claire used to sit in the garage on a folding chair and read while I worked under the hood. She said the sound of wrenches was better than any podcast. Diane called an emergency board meeting on a Thursday night. 3 board members attended. Diane, her hand-picked vice president, and a man named Alan, who never voted against her on anything. They passed a resolution. Exposed vehicle restoration in residential garages is prohibited. All non-operational vehicles must be fully enclosed in opaque coverings at all times. Violation fine, $500 per day. The resolution applied to exactly one house in Hawthorne Estates. Mine. I bought a canvas car cover the next morning, draped it over the Chevelle, closed the garage door, complied fully. But Diane wasn't done. Every Saturday when I pulled the cover off to work on the engine, she'd roll up in the Escalade, park at the end of the block, and photograph my open garage from her driver's seat. Monday morning, a new violation letter would arrive. Vehicle restoration observed on premises. Garage door open beyond permitted hours. Non-compliant vehicle visible from street. $500 each. I stopped arguing. I paid the fines. And I started reading more carefully. The HOA financial statements I'd pulled up after the tomato incident kept nagging at me. One line item in particular. Under grounds maintenance, there was a contract with a company called Peachtree Premier Grounds LLC. Monthly fee, $7,250. Annual total, $87,000. For a subdivision with 112 homes and one elderly man named Hector, who pushed a mower twice a week. I've audited defense contractors who padded invoices less aggressively than that. I ran the name through the Georgia Secretary of State's business filing database. It's public. Anyone can search it. Peachtree Premier Grounds LLC. Registered agent, Gregory T. Caldwell. Business address, the Caldwell residence. Filed 4 years ago. Same year the landscaping contract appeared in the HOA books. Greg Caldwell, Diane's husband. The same man whose crew had destroyed Claire's tomatoes. My blood didn't boil, it went cold. Not because I was surprised, because I'd seen this exact pattern so many times at the bureau that I could have drawn it from memory. A family member sets up a shell company. An authority figure, HOA president, nonprofit chair, union treasurer, steers a contract to that company. Payments flow in. Services are minimal or non-existent. The money disappears into personal accounts. It's textbook vendor fraud, and it works because nobody reads the financials. Nobody asks questions. Nobody checks the Secretary of State website until somebody does. Lauren came down that weekend. She found me in the garage with the cover half off the Chevelle, hands black with grease, staring at my laptop propped on the workbench. "Dad, are you eating?" she asked. I said I was fine. She looked at the screen, spreadsheets, LLC filings, property records, and raised an eyebrow. "You're not retired, are you?" I closed the laptop and wiped my hands on a shop rag that smelled like transmission fluid and old pennies. "Your mom would have had a field day with this HOA president," I said. Lauren laughed. Then she looked at me longer than she needed to and said, "Just be careful. You came here to rest." She was right. I did come here to rest. But rest doesn't mean letting someone rob 112 families while she bulldozes widowers' gardens and photographs their garages from the end of the street. Rest means knowing when to move and when to wait. And right now, I was still waiting. The certified letter arrived on a Monday. Return receipt requested. I signed for it at the door while the mail carrier avoided eye contact, which told me he'd been delivering these before. Notice of intent to file lien. Hawthorne Estates Homeowners Association. The letter stated that I owed $4,800 in unpaid assessments and fines. If the balance was not resolved within 30 days, the HOA would file a lien on my property with the Gwinnett County Clerk of Superior Court. The letter was signed by Diane Caldwell, President, with a CC to the HOA's attorney. I sat down at my kitchen table and pulled out my records. I'm the kind of person who keeps canceled checks. Claire used to tease me about it. She said I filed receipts like other people collected stamps. But that habit had saved clients and convicted defendants more times than I could count. And right now it was about to save me. I'd paid $2,400 in fines by personal check. I had the canceled checks. Bank cleared, endorsed, deposited into the HOA's account at First Community Bank of Gwinnett. $2,400 in. The letter said I owed $4,800. The difference was exactly $2,400, the precise amount I'd already paid. Someone was doubling my balance. Either the books were incompetent or they were cooked. And after what I'd found in the Peachtree Premier filings, I wasn't betting on incompetence. I didn't respond to the letter. I filed it. Evidence has a shelf life, and premature responses give the other side time to clean up. 3 days later, I ran into Joyce Whitfield at the Publix on Satellite Boulevard. Joyce was 49, an accountant by training, and she'd been the HOA board treasurer for 2 years. She was the kind of woman who looked permanently tired. not from work, but from holding something in. I'd seen her at 2 board meetings, always sitting at the far end of the table, always quiet, always writing notes that nobody asked to see. She recognized me in the produce aisle and hesitated like she was deciding whether to keep walking. Then she stopped, looked around to make sure nobody from the neighborhood was nearby, and said, "Tom, can I talk to you for a minute?" We stood between the bell peppers and the organic spinach, while Joyce told me what she'd been carrying for 2 years. "I've been asking Diane about the landscaping contract since I joined the board," she said. "Every time I bring it up, she shuts me down. She says the accountant handles it. Tom, there is no accountant. I do the books. Or at least, I do the books she lets me see." Joyce's hands were shaking. Not dramatically, just a fine tremor in her fingers as she held her shopping basket. "She keeps a second set of records. I've never seen the full bank statements. She gives me summaries. Typed summaries, not actual bank documents. When I asked for login access to the HOA's operating account, she told me it was a board-level security matter and that my role was limited to recording approved expenditures. I asked Joyce if she'd ever considered going to the county or to a lawyer. She shook her head. She threatened to sue the last board member who questioned her, said he violated the confidentiality clause in the bylaws. He resigned the next week and put his house on the market. Joyce reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were partial bank statements. 3 months of transactions she'd managed to access during a brief window when Diane forgot to change the online banking password after a system update. "I printed these before she locked me out again," Joyce said. "I've been carrying them in my car for 6 months. I didn't know what to do with them." I took the folder, told her I'd look at them carefully. She nodded and said, "I'm not brave, Tom. I'm just tired of pretending I don't see it." "You don't have to be brave," I said. "You just have to be honest when the time comes." I drove home with the folder on my passenger seat, and a feeling I hadn't had since I left the bureau. The feeling you get when a case stops being a theory and starts being a trail. Because Joyce had just handed me 3 months of wire transfers, and every single one of them pointed to the same place. I spread Joyce's bank statements across my kitchen table at 9 o'clock that night, and didn't get up until 2 in the morning. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the scratch of my pen on a yellow legal pad. Claire's photo sat on the shelf above the stove, the one from our anniversary trip to Savannah, her hair blowing sideways, laughing at something I'd said that I couldn't remember anymore. I'd done this exact thing 1,000 times at the bureau. Same posture, same yellow pad, same cold coffee going bitter on the table. The only difference was the view. Instead of a cubicle in the J. Edgar Hoover building, I was sitting in a ranch house in Gwinnett County, tracing the same kind of greed I'd spent my whole career chasing. The statements covered January through March, 3 months of transactions in the HOA's operating account at First Community Bank. Most of the entries were normal: utility payments, insurance premiums, a monthly retainer to the HOA's legal counsel. But one line item repeated every single month like a heartbeat. Wire transfer. Peachtree Premier Grounds LLC, $7,250. Sent on the 15th of each month. Destination account at a bank in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The HOA's bank was in Georgia. The payment crossed state lines. And in federal law, the moment money moves across a state border through electronic transfer, you're not looking at a local bookkeeping problem anymore. You're looking at wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. Each individual transfer is a separate count. Maximum penalty, 20 years per count. I pulled up Gwinnett County property records on my laptop. The Caldwell Mansion, 4,200 square feet on a half-acre lot on Magnolia Ridge Court, had undergone a major renovation 2 years ago. Permits filed for a full kitchen remodel, in-ground pool installation, driveway replacement with imported granite pavers, and a master bathroom expansion. Total permitted construction value, $280,000. I went back to the Peachtree Premier filings. The company had received $87,000 per year from the HOA for 4 consecutive years, $347,000 total. Subtract what they actually paid Hector, roughly $18,000 a year in cash, no W-2, no 1099, and the remaining amount was $319,000. Money in, minimal service out, and a mansion renovation that appeared right in the middle of the timeline. Then I checked Greg's tax returns through public court filings from a previous civil dispute, a contractor lien from 2021 that had been settled. In those filings, Greg listed Peachtree Premier Grounds LLC as inactive, no revenue. But the bank statements showed monthly wire transfers of $72.50, hitting that company's account like clockwork. Claiming income on paper while telling the IRS the company didn't operate is textbook tax evasion. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the legal pad. I'd drawn a flowchart without thinking about it, the same kind I used to pin to the corkboard in my office. HOA dues from 112 families flow into the operating account. Diane signs the checks. Money wires to Peachtree Premier in Tennessee. Greg receives it. Greg pays himself. The Caldwells renovate their mansion with stolen community money and report none of it to the IRS. Wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. And because Diane signed every check as a fiduciary, an HOA president entrusted with other people's money, the fraud charges carried enhanced penalties under Georgia's RICO statute, which treats HOA embezzlement the same as stealing from a nonprofit. I picked up Claire's photo from the shelf and held it for a moment. "She picked the wrong house, sweetheart," I said to the empty kitchen. Then I put the photo back, opened a new document on my laptop, and started writing the kind of memo I hadn't written in 2 years. A case referral summary addressed to the FBI Atlanta Field Office, Financial Crimes Unit. Old habits, clean formatting, every claim sourced, every number cited. I called Sandra Voss on a Tuesday morning. Voss and I had worked together for 11 years at the Bureau. She'd been a junior agent on my first major embezzlement case, a church treasurer in Richmond who'd siphoned $400,000 through a catering company that didn't own a single pan. Voss was sharp, methodical, and she didn't waste time with small talk. She'd transferred to the Atlanta field office 3 years ago to run their white-collar squad. "Tom Calloway," she said when she picked up. "I heard you retired." "I did," I said. "Then I moved to Gwinnett County, and my HOA president stole $347,000. Voss was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "How solid is the paper?" "Wire transfers, crossing state lines monthly for 4 years. Shell company registered to her husband. Mansion renovation funded by embezzled HOA dues. Husband claiming the LLC is inactive on his tax returns, while receiving $87,000 a year through it. I've got partial bank statements, public filings, property records, and a board treasurer who'll cooperate." "I'll be there in 40 minutes, she said. Voss showed up in a dark blue sedan, no jacket, sleeves rolled. She sat at my kitchen table, drank my coffee, and read through everything I'd assembled. Spreadsheets I'd built from Joyce's bank statements, LLC registration documents printed from the Secretary of State website, Gwinnett County property records showing the renovation permits and timeline, the flowchart on my legal pad, tax filing excerpts from the civil lien case. She turned pages without speaking for 20 minutes, then looked up and said, "This is cleaner than half the cases my unit builds in 6 months." Here's what most people don't understand about financial crimes. The money always leaves a trail. It doesn't matter how clever you think you are. Wire transfers are logged by both banks. LLC filings are public. Property records are public. Tax returns get matched against 1099s and bank deposits. The IRS has computers that do nothing but compare reported income to known financial activity. And when the numbers don't match, a flag goes up. Diane and Greg had been running their scheme in plain sight for 4 years, protected by nothing but the assumption that nobody in a suburban HOA would ever bother to look. I looked, and I knew exactly what to look for. Voss introduced me to Assistant United States Attorney Nathan Holt at the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. Holt was mid-30s, former Army JAG, and he had the lean focus of a prosecutor who hadn't lost a case he'd chosen to bring. I laid out the case in his conference room, same memo, same flowchart, same evidence binder. Holt listened, took notes, and asked 2 questions. First, can you prove the wire transfers were authorized by Diane Caldwell personally? Yes. She signed every check. The HOA's bylaws required the president's signature on all disbursements over $500. Every payment to Peachtree Premier bore her signature. Second, is there a cooperating witness inside the board? Joyce Whitfield, board treasurer, willing to testify, has first-hand knowledge of the dual bookkeeping system and the restricted access to financial records. Holt nodded. We can get a seizure warrant on the mansion. The renovation was funded with fraud proceeds. Under federal forfeiture law, Any asset purchased with the proceeds of wire fraud is subject to seizure. He paused. This also establishes motive for her harassment campaign against you. She wasn't just a control freak. She was trying to drive out the one homeowner smart enough to catch her. That afternoon, Voss brought in IRS criminal investigation. They opened a parallel case, tax evasion on $319,000 of unreported income flowing through Greg's supposedly inactive LLC. The CI agent who reviewed the file said he didn't even try to hide it. He just didn't think anyone would check. Within 3 weeks, a federal grand jury returned a sealed indictment. Arrest warrants for Diane and Greg Caldwell, asset seizure warrant for the mansion, 2 vehicles, and all associated bank accounts. Execution date set, sealed, and waiting. I went back to Hawthorne Estates and watered what was left of my lawn. Smiled at Diane when she drove past. She gave me her usual look, the one that said I was temporary, and she was permanent. She had no idea what was coming. Diane didn't know about the indictment, but she knew something had changed. I think it was the way I stopped reacting. For weeks I'd been the obedient target, paying fines, covering my car, replanting and losing and absorbing every hit she threw. But after the grand jury, something shifted in me. I was calm in a way she couldn't read. And people like Diane Caldwell need to read you. They need to see the flinch, the frustration, the defeated posture of a man who's about to list his house with a realtor. When that signal disappears, they get nervous. And nervous people escalate. She called an emergency board meeting on a Tuesday evening. 3 members present, the same rubber stamp quorum she always used. They voted to suspend my access to the HOA-controlled irrigation system due to unresolved assessment disputes. The resolution passed unanimously. By Thursday, my water line was shut off. July in Gwinnett County is not a place where grass survives without water. The temperature hit 96 that week. Humidity made the air feel like breathing through a wet towel. The red clay in my yard cracked and split within 5 days. The lawn turned from green to yellow to brown, in stages I could almost watch in real time, like a time-lapse of neglect. The only green left on my property was a patch of crabgrass near the mailbox that was too stubborn to die. On day 12 of the shutoff, a new violation letter arrived. Failure to maintain residential landscaping in accordance with Article 4, Section 3 of the Hawthorne Estates CC&RS. Fine. $300. The letter included a photograph of my dead lawn taken from the street. Diane's angle, Diane's camera, Diane's handwriting on the sticky note attached to the print. Final warning. She cut my water. Then she fined me for not having water. That's the kind of precision cruelty that keeps me believing some people don't want power to do good. They want power to punish. And Diane had been punishing this neighborhood for 9 years, with the surgical focus of someone who genuinely enjoyed it. But the water was just the opening move. The isolation campaign started the same week. Pete Harmon told me about it first. He came over on a Saturday morning. No beer this time. Just a worried look and his hands in his pockets. She's going door to door, Tom, telling people you're a troublemaker, that you're litigious, that you're going to file a lawsuit that'll raise everyone's dues. He paused. A couple people are buying it. The Hendersons won't look at me anymore because I talked to you. I asked Pete if he believed any of it. He snorted. I've been watching that woman steal from this neighborhood for years. I just never had the guts to say it out loud. The isolation worked on some people. Neighbors who used to wave from their driveways started looking the other way. A woman who'd brought me a casserole when I moved in crossed the street to avoid passing my house. It was subtle and deliberate, the social equivalent of cutting off my water. Diane was trying to make me feel so unwelcome that I'd sell and leave before I caused her any more trouble. Then came the cease and desist letter. Diane's personal attorney, not the HOA's counsel but her own private lawyer, sent a 2-page letter accusing me of harassment, defamation, and intentional interference with HOA governance. It demanded that I immediately stop making inquiries into the financial operations of the association and warned that continued behavior would result in civil litigation seeking damages and injunctive relief. I read it twice, folded it carefully, placed it in the evidence folder on my kitchen table, right behind Joyce's bank statements and the LLC filings. A cease and desist letter from a target of a federal investigation sent to the person who reported her, demanding he stop investigating. In the Bureau, we had a name for that kind of document. We called it consciousness of guilt, and juries loved it. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea, sat on the porch, and watched the sun go down behind the dead lawn. The sealed indictment was sitting in a federal clerk's office in Atlanta. Diane's mansion was 12 weeks from a padlock, and she was spending her last free months writing cease and desist letters to the one person in the neighborhood who knew exactly how to read them. The anniversary fell on a Thursday. 1 year since Claire died. 365 days of waking up to a bed that was too wide, and a kitchen that was too quiet, and a life that still had her fingerprints all over it, but not her voice. Lauren called that morning and asked if I wanted her to come. I told her no. Some grief you carry alone because sharing it would make it heavier, not lighter. I bought magnolias from a florist on Buford Highway. White ones. The kind that smell like lemon and sugar and something you can't name. Claire loved magnolias. She said they were the only flower that smelled exactly the way the South was supposed to feel. I drove 45 minutes to Peachtree Hills Cemetery in Atlanta, parked under an oak tree that was older than the highway, and walked to her stone. I sat in the grass for 2 hours, told her about the house, about the Chevelle. I'd finally gotten the wiring harness sorted, and the engine turned over clean for the first time last weekend. Told her about the tomatoes. I'd replanted again in the backyard this time, where Diane's crew couldn't reach them. Told her I'd made a friend named Pete, who brought beer and opinions in equal measure. I didn't tell her about the case. She would have known anyway. Claire always said I couldn't sit in a room with a crooked picture frame without straightening it. I left the magnolias in the bronze vase by the headstone, and drove home as the sun went down. Georgia sunsets in late summer are long and slow. The sky turns copper, then purple, then a deep blue that holds the last light, like it doesn't want to let go. I rolled down the windows and let the warm air fill the cab, and tried to feel something other than tired. I pulled into my driveway at 7 minutes past 11. The porch light was off. I always left the porch light on. I reached for my house key, slid it into the deadbolt, and it stopped halfway. Wouldn't turn. I pulled it out, checked it. Right key, right lock. Tried again. Nothing. Tried the back door. Different lock, same result. The garage. A padlock I'd never seen before. Brass and heavy, hanging from the hasp like it had always been there. Every door, every entry point, changed. I stood in my own driveway, holding a bouquet of wilting magnolias, and stared at the door of the house I owned. The night air was thick with the smell of warm asphalt and cut grass from somewhere down the street. Crickets screamed from every direction, and across the street, a light clicked on. Diane Caldwell's second-floor bedroom window. She was standing behind the curtain. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I could see her silhouette, and I could see that she was smiling. She walked downstairs, opened her front door, stepped onto her porch in a silk robe and slippers, arms crossed, chin lifted. The porch light behind her made her look like she thought she was standing on a stage. "The board voted this afternoon, Mr. Calloway," she said. Her voice carried across the street with the confidence of someone who had practiced this moment. "You've been declared in default. Your property access has been suspended, pending resolution of all outstanding assessments." She paused, and I watched her savor it. "Consider this your final eviction notice. You don't belong here." I looked at her for a long time. I didn't speak. I didn't move toward her house. I didn't raise my voice. I set the magnolias on the hood of my truck, got back in the cab, and made 2 phone calls. The first was to the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Department. I reported an illegal lockout under Georgia Code Section 44-7-14.1. Changing someone's locks without a court order is a misdemeanor in this state, and I wanted it on record. The second was to Sandra Voss. "She just broke into my house and changed the locks," I said. "Can you move the warrant up to tomorrow morning?" Voss didn't hesitate. "I'll make the call." Deputy Kyle Stanton arrived at 11:40. Young guy, professional, took one look at the padlock garage and the new deadbolts and called an emergency locksmith. 20 minutes later, I was back inside my own home. Stanton wrote his report at my kitchen table and said, "Sir, I don't know what's going on between you and your HOA, but what she did tonight is a crime." I thanked him, closed the door, put the magnolias in a glass vase on the kitchen counter, Claire's spot, looked at the clock. 12:15 in the morning. In 5.5 hours, Diane Caldwell was going to learn what happens when you pick a fight with someone who spent 25 years making sure people like you end up in handcuffs. I didn't sleep. I didn't try. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and watched the clock on the microwave count down the hours. 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 4:30. The first birds started outside my window, mockingbirds, then cardinals, then the low hum of mourning doves that sounds like a question nobody ever answers. The sky through the kitchen window shifted from black to charcoal to a thin line of amber on the eastern horizon. At 5:42, I heard engines, not cars, something heavier. The low rumble of V8s rolling at parade speed, tires crunching over the smooth asphalt of Magnolia Ridge Court. I set my coffee down and walked to the front window. 3 black Chevrolet Tahoes turned the corner in a line, headlights off, running lights only. Behind them, 2 gray Ford Taurus sedans. Government fleet, no question. The convoy moved past my house without stopping. Agent Voss was in the lead vehicle. I saw her profile through the driver's side window, and for a moment our eyes met. She gave me a single nod. No wave, no smile. Just the nod of someone who'd done this 100 times and never got tired of the part that came next. The vehicles stopped in front of the Caldwell mansion. 5 doors opened almost simultaneously. 8 people stepped out. 4 in dark blue FBI tactical vests with yellow lettering. 2 in navy windbreakers marked IRS, Criminal Investigation. 1 in a suit who I recognized as AUSA Nathan Holt, and Agent Voss in her field jacket with her credentials hanging from a lanyard. They formed up on the driveway. Voss walked to the front door. The granite pavers that Greg Caldwell had laid with stolen money echoed under her boots. She rang the doorbell, waited 3 seconds, knocked. 3 firm strikes with the side of her fist. FBI, open the door, we have a federal warrant. Lights went on inside. The upstairs hallway, then the foyer. The door opened and Diane Caldwell stood in the entrance of her 4,200 square foot mansion, wearing a white silk nightgown and no shoes. Her platinum hair was flat on one side. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, blinking against the porch light, trying to process what she was seeing. Voss held up the warrant. Diane Caldwell, I'm Special Agent Sandra Voss with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest and a federal seizure order for this property and all associated assets. She spoke the way federal agents speak, clear, measured, practiced. No drama. The drama was built into the words themselves. Greg appeared behind Diane in boxer shorts and a Georgia Bulldogs t-shirt, mouth open, hands raised like he'd seen it done on television, but never imagined it happening in his own foyer. 2 agents stepped past Diane and took Greg's wrists. The handcuffs clicked with a sound that carried across the still morning air. Greg didn't resist. He just said, "There's been a mistake." Nobody answered him. Diane was louder. "You can't do this. This is my house. I'm the president of this homeowners association." She said it like the title was a shield. Like those 3 words had protected her for 9 years and would protect her now. Voss didn't blink. "Ma'am, the United States doesn't recognize HOA titles." An agent pulled a cordless drill from a kit bag, removed the existing deadbolt from the mansion's front door, and replaced it with a federal padlock. He pressed a sticker onto the door. White, rectangular, official. Property seized by the United States of America. The same door Diane had walked through every morning for 9 years now belonged to the federal government. By then, the neighborhood was awake. Porch lights popped on down the street like dominoes. Pete Harmon stood on his lawn in pajama pants and a bathrobe, coffee mug frozen halfway to his mouth, staring. Joyce Whitfield stood at the edge of her driveway with her hand over her mouth, crying, not from sadness but from the sudden release of something she'd been holding in for years. 3 or 4 neighbors drifted to the sidewalk. Someone down the block shouted, "About time!" Diane was walked to the second Tahoe, handcuffs on, silk nightgown catching the early light, no clipboard, no linen blazer, no sunglasses. She looked, for the first time since I'd moved to Hawthorne Estates, like exactly what she was, a woman who had stolen from her neighbors for nearly a decade and had finally run out of people willing to look the other way. As the agent opened the vehicle door, Diane turned and looked across the street, at me. I was standing on my porch, coffee in my hand, the same porch she'd targeted with violation letters since my first week. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw something in Diane Caldwell's face that I'd never seen there before. Fear. I didn't say a word. I took a sip of coffee. Deputy Stanton pulled up just as the Tahoes were preparing to leave. He'd heard the call on the scanner. He walked over to me, looked at the padlocked mansion, looked at Diane in the back of the SUV, and said, "Guess she got her locks changed after all." I laughed. First real laugh in a long time. The federal case moved fast once the arrests were public. A grand jury in the Northern District of Georgia returned a 14-count indictment against Diane Caldwell, 12 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of tax evasion conspiracy, and 1 count of embezzlement of association funds under Georgia RICO. Greg Caldwell was charged separately with 3 counts of tax evasion and 2 counts of wire fraud conspiracy. Combined, they faced 25 to 40 years. Their attorney filed for bail. The judge set it at $350,000 each, cash bond. Neither of them posted it the first week. The mansion on Magnolia Ridge Court was sold at federal auction 4 months later. Final price, $680,000. Every penny went into a restitution fund for the Hawthorne Estates homeowners. Diane's Escalade was seized. Greg's F-250 was seized. The boat they kept at Lake Lanier, a 24-foot pontoon that no one in the neighborhood had ever been invited onto, was seized. The account at the Chattanooga bank was frozen the morning of the arrests and held a balance of $41,000, all recovered. Joyce Whitfield was elected HOA president in a special election 6 weeks after the arrests. She won 89-4. Her first act was to hire an independent auditor. Her second act was to reduce annual dues from $25.20 back to $14.40. Her third act was to fire Peachtree Premier Grounds LLC and hire a real landscaping company with real employees and a real truck that showed up every Tuesday. The pool got a new pump. The playground got new swings. The front gate worked every day for the first time in 6 years. Hector, the old man who'd been pushing the mower, was hired directly by the new company at $15 an hour with benefits. He told Pete he'd never had health insurance before. I used my share of the restitution, along with a small portion of the recovered funds that the new board voted to allocate, to establish the Claire Calloway Community Garden Fund. The empty lot behind the pool, a 1/4 acre of red clay and crabgrass that the HOA had ignored for a decade, was cleared, tilled, and divided into 40 raised beds. One for every family that wanted one. I built the beds myself, cedar frames, just like Claire used to sketch on napkins when she was planning her spring garden. I planted Cherokee purple tomatoes in bed number 1, put a small bronze plaque on the post, in memory of Claire Calloway, who believed every garden starts with one seed. Lauren drove down the weekend the garden opened. She brought a flat of basil and a bottle of wine, and a photograph of her mother kneeling in the garden in Falls Church, dirt on her knees, squinting into the sun. We hung the photo in a waterproof frame on the garden shed wall. Then we sat at the picnic table I'd built from leftover cedar and ate tomatoes straight off the vine. The juice ran down our chins and stained our shirts, and neither of us cared. Mom would have loved this, Lauren said. She's the one who planted it, I said. Pete came by that evening with a 6-pack and a grin that wouldn't quit. He sat in the folding chair next to mine, cracked a beer, and said, "You know, Tom, I told you 3 families before you all moved. Nobody ever fought back." I took a sip and watched 2 kids from the Harrison family chasing each other through the sprinklers across the street. Their laughter carried over the warm evening air, mixing with the sound of someone's radio playing something slow and southern from an open garage door. The streetlights were coming on, and the neighborhood smelled like fresh-cut grass. Real grass, cut by a real crew, paid for with real money that actually went where it was supposed to go. Nobody had to, I said. Diane Caldwell is currently awaiting trial in the Northern District of Georgia. Her attorney has requested 3 continuances. The judge denied the 3rd. Greg pleaded guilty to 2 counts and is cooperating. The trial is expected to last 2 weeks. Legal experts following the case say Diane faces 15 to 20 years. I still live in Hawthorne Estates. I finished the Chevelle last month. Candy apple red, the color Claire picked out from a swatch book 11 years ago. I drive it to the garden on Saturday mornings and water the beds before the heat sets in. The neighborhood waves, the gate works, the dues are fair, and nobody changes my locks. If your HOA president thinks she's above the law, drop your story in the comments below. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Because next week, I've got a story about an HOA president who tried to demolish a veteran's workshop. She didn't know he had a Purple Heart and a very good lawyer.
And that's what happens when an HOA president confuses a clipboard with a crown. Diane Caldwell spent 9 years running Hawthorne Estates like a private fiefdom. inflating fines, destroying property, cutting off water, and driving families out of their own homes. She funneled $347,000 through her husband's shell company, renovated her mansion with stolen money, and reported none of it to the IRS. She thought she was untouchable. Then she changed locks on a retired FA forensic accountant and found out just how touchable she really was. Here's the takeaway. Your HOA president is a fiduciary. That means she's legally required to handle your money honestly. If your dues keep going up but your neighborhood keeps going down, someone is scheming. Check your Secretary of State website for LLC filings. Cross-reference vendor contracts with board members' families' names. The paper trail is almost always public. You just have to look. If you ever dealt with an HOA president who thought the rules only apply to everyone else, tell me your story in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you next week with a story that's going to make this one look like a warm-up.